This episode of Sports Spectrum's podcast is presented by our friends at Compassion International. We love the partnership that we have with Compassion. We love what they stand for, releasing children from poverty in Jesus' name. And right now, you can go to compassion.com/sports spectrum. There are children right there when you go to that website who've been waiting for more than a year. In some cases, some over 660 days. They've been waiting for a sponsorship, for an opportunity, for a chance, for you and I to step up, team up with Compassion, and help release these kids from poverty. And for $38 a month, it's tax deductible. It connects you with a child living in poverty, and your support provides medical checkups, nutritious food, health and hygiene training, educational assistance, mentoring, and most important of all, every child will hear about Jesus Christ and be encouraged to develop a lifelong relationship with God. You can learn more at compassion.com/sports spectrum. You'll see a list of children there. You can sponsor that child right now, or you can pray about it, talk about it with your family, and help release a kid from poverty in Jesus' name. Compassion International. Check them out at compassion.com/sports spectrum.
This is Sports Spectrum, the intersection of sports and faith, where we bring Jesus back into the conversation. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
And hi, everyone. Welcome to the show. I am Jason, and this is the Sports Spectrum podcast. We got a great conversation coming up with Jake Boss Jr., the head baseball coach at Michigan State. This was really a fantastic conversation about coaching, leadership, lessons learned in those difficult, dark times. Coaching a baseball team where you play your home games in March in Michigan outside. It's cold there in Michigan in March. Eventually it warms up, but how do you handle that? There's so much good stuff, so much rich content here from Jake Boss. I think you guys are going to really enjoy this conversation. Before we get to our conversation with Jake, just want to remind you of our Sports Spectrum website, sportspectrum.com. Free content, all available right there at the website, sportspectrum.com. And we do devotionals now every day, Monday through Friday at 6 a.m. Eastern on the website. But here's the thing, in 2022 now, we have an opportunity for you to sign up for those devotionals to come directly to your email inbox. So if you go to our devotional page at sportspectrum.com, all you got to do is put your email address in, and you will receive our devotional directly to your email inbox every morning. I tell you, when I do my devotionals, that's the way to go. Have it directly sent to your email each morning so you don't forget. And so it helps remind you to get in God's word, even if it's for a couple minutes each day with Sports Spectrum's devotionals. You can do that by signing up over at sportspectrum.com. All right, let's get to our conversation with Jake Boss from Michigan State. I loved talking to the head baseball coach with the Spartans, and he joins us right now on Sports Spectrum. Hey, Jake, how are you?
I'm doing great, Jason. How are you?
I'm doing well. So good to have you here on the show. Thanks for joining us today. As we release this, you've already gotten the season underway, playing in some warm weather areas, including Las Vegas and Texas. But your home opener, when I saw this, I had to ask you about this, isn't until March 18th, which still feels like it would be really cold to play baseball in Michigan on March 18th. That can't be fun, I have to imagine, early on. I mean, you got to play the games and get your games in. But mid-March in Michigan playing baseball, sometimes, I mean, you probably have had to deal with some snow events, I would imagine.
You know, Jason, we have in the past, and we have a temperature rule in our conference, which sounds a little crazy, but if the temperature is below 28 degrees, we don't play. If it's 28 or above, we do. And so it's just part of playing in the North, and we recruit to that, honestly. I mean, I think it's important to have a good number of Midwest kids that are used to preparing and playing in the cold weather, because it's it can be a challenge for sure. And
have you ever recruited a Florida kid and had him come up and play, and they were just shell shocked on that first 30-degree day?
Well, for sure. We've had kids from Arizona, California before, and some of them had never seen snow before. And we just try to tell them, it's going to be different, but we practice in it, and it is what it is. We got to get our games in, and we like to play at home as much as we can. So it's all part of it.
What's the coldest game that you've ever been a part of, coaching, maybe playing too? But like, does one game in particular come to mind when you think about just playing in the elements or playing in the freezing cold?
Yeah, my first year here at Michigan State, there are two of them that really stand out. My first year at Michigan State, we played at Illinois, and we played a doubleheader in the snow, basically the entire day. And the umpires were ready to bang the second game after the first. And us coaches, Dan Hartlib and I, who's a good friend, we both said, look, we've kind of gutted it out through the first one. We're all here. We need to play. So much to their chagrin, we ended up playing game two. But then we played Indiana here a couple years ago, and kind of the same thing. We were dodging snow and had a couple snow delays. And, again, it's part of baseball in the North. And until we can get the season pushed back into the summer, it's going to be the way it is. So we just got to push through it.
That's right. I mean, I live up in the Northeast as well. I'm in Connecticut, and I don't think it's as cold as Michigan in mid to late March, but it's pretty close. And I just think about my daughter playing softball and starting up in March, and they don't go outside, I don't think, unless it's 40 degrees maybe or more. And it's not until late March, and they play their first games in early April. And even then, I've been to those games wearing winter coats and hats and gloves like it's the middle of winter. So it's just part of the hand that you're dealt, right?
That's right. It's part of it. And, we've had years too where it's been in the 70s and even 80 degrees in the middle of March too. And, we've gotten snow in April. So, it's just, you never quite know what you're going to get. And, we'll schedule that home opener and keep our fingers crossed.
Well, first of all, let's pray for that 70 and 80 degree March weather for the entire Northeast and in the northern part of the country. When you think about this year's team, what gets you most excited about the team on the field this year?
Well, a lot of returning guys, especially, as far as our position players are concerned. We're young up the middle, but I think we're pretty talented up the middle. And as far as our pitching staff is concerned, we're deeper than we were a year ago, just primarily because we're healthy. And so with COVID and in our conference, we played only conference games last year as a conference mandate. There are a lot of undefined roles right now, and I think we tried to figure some of that out in the fall. But you never know until you get in the middle of it. So I think that's exciting about our team as well. I mean, we've got a bunch of guys, I think, that love to compete and are going to go play hard. And it's kind of a staple of our program and what we do, win or lose. We're going to play, hard for 9 innings. And, getting a chance to do that with these guys and to see how it all kind of shakes out, I think is going to be a lot of fun. But, there's a core group of guys there. Up the middle, especially our catcher, our two middle guys, in a new center fielder that are all young but very talented. So, we'll see what happens. But, these guys worked their tails off in the fall, had a great fall. We had an outstanding semester in the classroom, and, they're fun to be around. So that's the main part of it.
But you mentioned COVID. Go back a couple of years ago. What was that like, just having to pivot in 2020? I mean, we're still kind of in it, but in 2020, it was so new and shocking, and it affected everybody personally, professionally. But as a coach, having to relay that message to your team, having to stop and you put all that work into preparing for a season, and then it just gets shut down. What was that time like for you?
Toughest meeting that I've ever had to lead. I'll never forget going into that locker room and telling those guys the season is over. And for, our seniors at the time thought their careers were over, and I'll never forget it. We were getting ready to go to Indiana State, and we had practiced at our place. Literally the bus was in the parking lot, and we got the call that said, first of all, you're not going. And then 20 minutes later, we got another call that said the season was over. And there were, unbelievable emotions in that locker room, from shock and sadness to anger. And, as the head coach, and me and my staff, we have to try to manage that, I guess, as best as we can. And man, that was not easy. and it's still, not easy. I think,
Right.
it can be frustrating at times, and, you see games getting shut down and postponed and canceled, and that's frustrating. But, I think, it's been an unbelievable learning experience for our guys too, how to handle your business, and some, a lot of times, things are out of your control, and you can do everything right and still have to, sit out for 10 days or, whatever it is. So kind of giving up some of that control and doing what you're supposed to do, and when you're being where you're supposed to be, when you're supposed to be there, and just being ready.
Yeah, it feels like with your role, with your job, you're not just a coach, but you're certainly a mentor. But in some ways, counselor was the word that came to my mind, especially when you're having to have that type of meeting. It's almost like you're a counselor and you're welcoming your kid in, and you have to sit down and it's like, all right, how you doing? Tell me your problems. There's probably a lot of that, maybe not just during a COVID time, but in general as a coach, that maybe a lot of people don't see is that sort of counselor type role.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it too, and I think it's growing. I think that's becoming a bigger part. I mean, I think that relationship piece of the player coach relationship is the biggest part of, I think, what we do. And so, when those relationships are strong, I think there is a lot of those conversations do take place, and there's got to be a trust that's there as well. And sometimes that can be difficult. I mean, we talk with some of my buddies that are also head coaches. As soon as you get that title, the wall goes up, and you got to really try to work hard at those relationships to build that trust up, and so you're able to have those meaningful conversations. But I remember going through it myself when I played, and probably you at the same age. I mean, these guys are going through a lot. Yes. And it seems like, with social media and all the different pressures, and now you throw NIL in and transfer portal and all that other stuff. There's a lot of different issues that guys are going through at that age from 18 to 21. I mean, we've had we've had family issues, we've had girlfriend issues, grandparents. A lot of grandparents pass away at this age just because of the age of these guys and their grandparents. My grandfather passed away when I was in school. We've had parents that have been sick, and so there's a lot that goes into it, and you try to manage that as best you can, and kind of use baseball as an escape. I think use the practice field and the games sometimes as an escape and as a way to to kind of take a break.
Jake Boss is our guest here on Sports Spectrum. Was baseball always the sport that you gravitated toward when you were younger?
Oh yeah, for me it was. I grew up in the dugout. Really, my dad was a longtime high school coach in the state of Michigan. He's in the Michigan High School Hall of Fame, and we have a really unique relationship in that I was his bad boy as a young kid. I got a chance to play for him, and then I got a chance to work for him, and then work with him, and then have him work for me. And so there's been. That relationship has seen a lot of different twists and turns for sure. But I'm from this area. I grew up here, and to be able to come home, to really kind of have my dream job and get a chance to work with my dad has been really something that's been special for us and our family. But to answer your question, yeah, I mean, it was, as far as as I can remember, I remember the bus and the dugout and running around picking up bats and playing catch with all of his players and all of that.
So I don't know how old you are. How old are you, Jake?
I'll be 51 in March.
51. I'm 48. Yeah. So we're close to the same age. So I have to imagine growing up in the 80s in Michigan, Detroit, that 84 team. Were you a big Tigers fan, I have to imagine?
Ironically, I wasn't.
You weren't?
No, I wasn't. So my dad grew up in Chicago. And when I was a kid, we were always going back into Chicago to see family and things like that. So I was a big White Sox fan.
Wow. Well, the White Sox were pretty good in the mid 80s.
They were
some pretty good teams.
They did. Yeah, they did. And it's funny because, Scott Fletcher was my guy. And, Scott Fletcher was a solid player, but certainly not a star or whatever. But, my dad was involved with a ministry group called Unlimited Potential. And
UPI, sure.
Yeah. And, was kind of in on the ground level with Tom Roy and those guys. And they did a camp or a clinic over in Chicago one day, and I was just a little guy, and Scott Fletcher was there, and we had a conversation. So all of a sudden, that's my guy, But I remember vividly those 84 teams, and being at Michigan State now, Kirk Gibson is around a lot, and Kirk's son played for us here.
Yes.
And so, listening to him tell some of those stories about the World Series, not only Detroit, but in LA has been really, really kind of cool. So.
Well, Kirk Gibson broke this 14-year-old's heart because I'm a Mets fan. I grew up a New York Mets fan. And
Okay.
in 1988, he had a homer off of off of Roger McDowell, I think it was, in 88 Game 4 NLCS.
Okay.
The Mets should have been in the World Series that year. I tell people that. But Kirk Gibson won the MVP, and obviously the home run against the A's is, legendary. But he broke my heart for sure. So if you see Kirk, tell him.
I will do that.
Tell him I'm still sore and sad about that, Jake, if you could.
I will definitely do that.
So your heroes were Scott Fletcher, your dad certainly.
Mm-hmm.
What are some lessons that you learned from your dad kind of growing up that you've now? I mean, it's such a cool circle of life moment. I think about the Lion King, right? And you just have this moment where you're learning from him, you're then coaching with him, and then he's coaching or working for you. It's such a cool kind of dynamic. I was somebody who grew up not really having a dad in my life. So I think about it. I'm a little jealous when I hear it, but it's such a cool thing to have happen. When you think now as a coach and where you are in your stage of life, what's a lesson or two? I'm sure there's many more that you take with you when you think about what you learned from your dad.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, Jason, I don't know that we have enough time to get into all of them because
Sure.
It's just, there's so many, but the two that really jump out, I think the first one was, my dad really worked, he was, we would go out in the summer and pick weeds on the field and edge the baselines. And you name it. And we did it. And so he really, really worked at it. And, as a high school coach, it's not your main job. Your main job is a teacher. And,
Yes.
but he put his heart and soul into that program. And I got the front row seat for that. And then, I think the other thing really, and we just kind of talked about it, but that relationship piece and coming back home and working here at Michigan State, in the same city that I went to high school with, my dad, and I take my dad to a lot of football games, basketball games and things like that. And, to this day, and my son has said the same thing, you can't go more than, 10 feet during halftime of a football or a basketball game here at Michigan State without somebody stopping to say hello to my dad or stopping me to say, hey, how's your dad doing? I had your dad in gym class at, in middle school in 1971, 50 some years ago. And, he had an impact on so many lives and continues to have an impact on so many lives here in the Lansing, East Lansing area that's probably the biggest one. He's, gets daily calls from former players and not even former players, but, former students that may not have played a sport or played for him, but he had him in gym class, and the impact that he's had on the amount of people in this area is just phenomenal.
Yeah. If anybody's listening, I know I hear that, and that's the kind of person I want to strive to be when I hear that. So that's just an awesome thing. Did you always know you wanted to coach though? Even though you're around your dad and seeing what he's doing, was coaching always in the genes even after you finished playing?
It was. And I remember, my mom actually pulled out about a year ago. She saved an essay that I wrote probably in third grade explaining that I wanted to be a teacher and a coach. And,
there you go.
And so I went to school. I got a teaching degree and taught high school English and social studies for a year and a half and coached before I got into college baseball. So the college thing wasn't really in the back of my mind. I had always kind of dreamt that I would be similar to my dad, I would be a teacher and a coach.
We haven't talked much about faith, but you mentioned UPI and certainly Unlimited Potential Incorporated. That's the connection that we're having here, not just sports, obviously, but the intersection of sports with faith. So tell me about the importance of Christ in your life and that faith in your life.
Well, it's been at the center of my life, really, as far back as I can remember. I grew up in a very strong Christian home, went to school, growing up in a Christian school. And, my story kind of took a bit of a turn, as a lot of us do, I think, when we went to college. I think, my dad was a pretty strict guy as far as, his players and things like that. And because of that, I shied away from a lot of, maybe opportunities in high school that could have gotten me into some trouble and rightfully so. But when I went away to college and things changed a little bit for me. I kind of felt like I had a little bit more freedom, and things really took a turn at that point. And God is he certainly is faithful, because I did a lot of things that I'm not proud of, and when I was in school. But the summer before I graduated, I was with a bunch of buddies and up in school, and we were out at the bar one night. I got into my car and drove home and got pulled over. And the police officer threw the handcuffs on me and took me away to jail for the night. And there's nothing more humbling for me anyway than having a pair of handcuffs on and sitting in a jail cell for 8 hours with nothing to do but think. And I remember very vividly thinking, this is wrong. I shouldn't be here. This is not who I am. And God spoke to me in that moment, and he said, no, it really is who you are right now. And you need to change, some things that, that are going on in your life, and certainly not perfect, and don't claim to be, but that was a turning point, I think, in my life, and kind of brought me back to, my roots, I guess, in Christ. And it's been incredible to see, how he has blessed me throughout my life, my career, my family. It's just unbelievable that a guy like me gets to do what I do and have, the family that I have. It's incredible. But that one night was, like I said, was definitely a turning point for sure.
How was Dad with you that one night, that when he finds that out? Because I've had a similar experience, and I remember my mom and talking to her, and I called her with a similar experience, right?
Yeah.
Like there was a police involved, and I said, Mom, this happened. And she goes, we'll talk about it tomorrow. And she just left me hanging for like 8 hours to process it. And it was like the scariest 8 hours I ever, I'm so upset that I had let her down,
Yeah. Oh, so was I. I was the same thing. And, I called home, and I was about an hour away, and it was 3:00 in the morning, and my dad answered the phone, and I explained to him what happened, and he hung up.
He just hung up. Wow.
I didn't know what to do. And the officer that was there, kind of chuckled and, shook his head. And I said, hey, do you mind if I call back? And he goes, yeah, go ahead. And my mom answered the phone, thank God. And, the car was impounded. I had to go get it. I had no way to get it, and so she said, okay, we'll be there in the morning. And from the cell that I sat in, I saw the door open up, and I saw my parents walk in. And they opened the door and let me out. My dad looked at me and said, how'd you sleep last night? And turned around and went back to the car, and didn't talk to me for about a week. And it was the longest week of my life. Right. Because just like you said, I had felt like I had disappointed him. We have the same name. My dad's name is Jake Voss as well. And my dad's a pretty big name in this area, and as far as high school baseball is concerned. And that, for the very first time, I saw, what kind of an impact I had on somebody else, because I really had disappointed him, and, had a lot of, had it gotten out, I mean, it would have been incredibly embarrassing, for him. And that was tough for sure.
Well, a great lesson though, right? Like representing the name, finding your identity in something bigger than, college and life. I mean, it's funny, you go through that, you don't like it when you're going through it, but man, when you come back out on the other side and you look back, you're like, I'm so glad I went through it. Right.
Well, and I've
in a weird way to say
in a weird way, for sure. And I've said this, the same thing to people. I think, really it probably was the best thing that could ever happen to me.
Right.
And you
don't wish that on anybody else, but
you don't
at the same time, you're glad that you went through it. Yeah,
that's exactly right. Yeah. Cause who knows, had that guy not pulled me over that night, who knows what would have happened, even later that night, or, the next week, the next year, who knows? I may not be here right now. So, yeah.
Now, we met on a Zoom call that you're a part of each Monday, a coach's Bible study with people in the middle in the baseball world. And I was invited to share with our mutual friend, Pastor Mike down in Atlanta, who leads it and does such a great job. And when I saw that and I listened to it, I was really impressed by, first of all the different people that were on it. Not many of them that I didn't know. They were just coaches. I knew that they were coaches, but the impact that all of those people, there was, I think, 75 people on this Zoom call.
Right.
And then you think about the 20 or 30 or 40 people that each of those people have, and you just keep multiplying and multiplying. And we're talking about discipleship here. Why was it important? Why is it important for you to be a part of something like that, like a weekly Bible study? And maybe there's others that you're a part of too, but to be on this Zoom call once a week for an hour, why is that important for you as a coach?
Well, Rich Maloney, who's the head coach at Ball State, I worked for Rich at the University of Michigan, and a very solid Christian guy. And he sent me an email or a text late in the summer and said, "Hey, if you get a chance on Monday morning, jump in here. I think you'll really enjoy it." And to be with a bunch of guys who are going through the same things.
Yeah.
Not only, on the college side of it, but the pro scouts too. We're all connected through this game in some way, shape, or form. And, we have an Athletes in Action Bible study here on campus with a group of coaches and head coaches from other sports, and that's fantastic as well. But, in our game, with the recruiting calendar the way that it is, and, again, everybody is really kind of got the same type of background to listen to some of the pillars really in our game. I mean, there are some big names that are on that Zoom call, and to hear the authenticity of those guys in that Bible study and talking about their experience, for me, it's easy to just kind of sit back and listen and go, oh my gosh. I mean, Keith Madison at Kentucky was there for a long, long time. I mean, a guy by the name of Rick Robinson, who's coached for a long time, and you name it, on and on and on. There are some big names in there, and to listen to their experiences, their growth in Christ, the impact that they have and how they impacted, their players, for me, it's just been a real treat, and again, I think, you want to get involved, but at the same time, I'm happy to sit back and listen to the wisdom of those guys and what they have to offer, because it's just tremendous. It really is something that I look forward to on a weekly basis every Monday.
Yeah, I was almost saddened that I'm not a coach, or a baseball coach or a scout, that I couldn't be on this call every week. I mean, I guess I could if I asked Mike, but I don't want to go into a place that's not mine, but just to be a part of something like that. And I started thinking, what are some ways that I could, or what's another place where people like in the role in the world that I am in could come together, who are like-minded, like you said, and be a part of something like that. So it got me thinking, it got the juices flowing.
That's awesome.
Jake, that's for sure. Tell me about living that faith out as a baseball coach. You work for Michigan State, so you can't go out there with a Bible in your hand and, a cross on your shirt and tell people about Jesus in the traditional form, I guess. Right. But there is a way to live out your faith, I think, and incorporate your faith as a coach. How do you kind of balance that and work that in to the role that you have?
Yeah, well, I think, and that's a big thing that really kind of excited me about that Bible study, because, the first part of it when I got on was the theme was living sense. And I thought, man, this is pretty appropriate. I think we're about planting seeds. Really, I have a staff that's Christian guys as well. And we talk about that here in the office too. I mean, I think our opportunity is to do just that, to plant a seed. And let's see how the Holy Spirit works. I mean, it's something as small as, we do take a knee and we say the Lord's Prayer before the game, before every game. And that's something that we will continue to do. And who knows where that can go. I mean, I talked to a guy who goes to our church who played Division I basketball a number of years ago. And that's, he kind of chuckled when we were talking about that. He said, that's what initially piqued my interest. Why are we doing this type of thing? And so when guys can start asking questions, and you go back to that relationship piece, I think there's some room for the Holy Spirit to work. And, again, planting seeds, I think is kind of what we do. And when guys start asking questions, then obviously I'm here. The door's always open. But, between that and just creating opportunities, I know our Athletes in Action staff here on campus is outstanding. And we've got a number of guys that are involved in that as well. And so giving those guys a platform and giving them some time, during the fall and during the spring and chapels on Sundays and things like that, I think it's all part of just that, planting seeds and kind of get out of the way.
Yeah, that's a really good way to look at it. It's so interesting and fascinating to me because when we started this show, my initial thought was that we were going to have more athletes on, a lot of athletes. I mean, and former athletes, and you're a former athlete as well, former baseball player. But the more I talk to coaches, the more I understand and realize the impact that coaches have and the responsibility and the privilege in some ways to be a coach and to be able to be entrusted with 25, 35, 45, whatever it is, how many players and people are on your staff to work through and lead. Do you kind of know that and recognize that now and the responsibility as a coach and see that and take that seriously enough to understand that, man, what a great platform and what a great place that the Lord has put you in to be a coach?
Yeah, I think more so now than at the beginning of my career, for sure. I think when you're an assistant, that relationship piece is what you do. I mean, that's the biggest part of your job. You're the liaison, the link between the players and the head coach. And so that at that point, it's easy. When you become a head coach, at least in my experience, you start to feel some pressure. I mean, if we don't win, I don't have a job anymore. And, so it's kind of, I wouldn't say it's easy to kind of get away from that, but I think it's easy to have your focus shift a little bit to, what are we doing here? When, what's the lineup going to be? And, you kind of get away. It's easy to kind of get away from that relationship, I guess, piece of it. And early on in my career, especially here at Michigan State, I would say I probably did that. My prayer before every game during the national anthem is that people would see Christ through me. And that wasn't always the case. And I'm not saying it's not the case. I'm certainly not a perfect guy. I can't tell you that, it's the case every game.
I haven't been a perfect guy yet, Jake.
No,
don't worry.
That's right. And it is a constant struggle, for me, because I love to compete. And when we don't do well, I tend to not take that very well,
Sure.
But when you're that invested in it, I think that can be natural. But, I think I try to handle things a little bit differently now than I did in the past. And, we'll see where it goes. I think we've had some good teams here. We've had some teams that have struggled here. But at the end of the day, I can put my head down and sleep well, now more than probably back then, 10, 15 years ago.
So as we wind down, and I ask this question a lot to all of our guests in closing, usually here on Sports Spectrum, what is God kind of teaching and showing you today? What's he showing you in the season of life that you're in right now? What do you think the lesson is that God has been teaching you today, Jake?
Well, probably more so than anything else, that he's the one that's in control and it's not me, and as we deal with COVID, as we deal with, you name it, there are a lot of things that I don't have control over. And I think as a head coach, that can be difficult sometimes, because I put the lineup together. I'm the one that takes the loss when we lose. And I'm happy to do that. I understand what the job's about, but you always kind of look inward. Well, we lost. Why did we lose? What am I not doing, to allow us to, give us the best chance to win? What do I need to do differently with this kid? Or do I need to teach this kid something different? And, all of that, I think, plays a big part into it, but at the end of the day, God's the one that's in control, and, I'll go back to when I was an assistant, and again, I didn't feel any of the pressures of winning and things like that. But, Rich Maloney, the guy that I worked for, would say in recruiting meetings, we'll get our guys, and I remember seeing Rich, deep in prayer at the end of the regional final game, with David Price on the mound, and it would take a miracle for us to win that game. And it happened, but, it's, and win or lose, I guess, ultimately, is that the main objective? Obviously, as a coach, you want to say that it is, but, am I able to, are people able to see Christ through me on a daily basis? And, again, if the more I can surrender that control and turn it over to him, I think the easier it is for people to see that through me.
Well, I've also been told and heard from a lot of athletes and coaches that you want to win, but it's not about the winning that identifies you. You want to win so that the platform might get a little bigger. More people might ask you about that winning, and it gives you another opportunity to talk about Christ. So there's
well,
that
I think
too.
I think that's great perspective, and I really, that's those are impressive people. I think when you have that kind of perspective going into it, I think that's tremendous, and that's how we further the kingdom. So
yeah, that's really good. Well, Jake, this has been great. Thank you so much for being here on Sports Spectrum. I really appreciate the time. All the best to you this season, and hopefully we'll have you back on again sometime. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Jason. I appreciate it.
And many thanks to Jake Boss Jr. from Michigan State for joining us here today on Sports Spectrum, head baseball coach over there with the Spartans. And I love talking to him. I really did. He had a lot of great stories, certainly playing baseball in the very cold weather. It's still cold, I'm imagining, right now, as the baseball season is just starting here in March. And it's also really, I think, a really good testimony from him in sharing that story when he got arrested and taken to the police station there when he was in college for drinking and then getting behind the wheel of a car. And I think, we've all made mistakes. All of us have done stupid things in our lives. And I think Jake wanted to share that to let people know that if you've made dumb mistakes, that's okay. God can still use you. He can still redeem you. And sometimes it's in that really awful mess that we make of ourselves that God does his best work. I know it's happened with me, and certainly I appreciate Jake Boss for sharing that it happened to him as well. So we appreciate him. Thank you, Jake Boss, for being here today on the show. We thank you as well for listening, Sports Spectrum fans and friends. We love you guys. We really do. If you could, a couple things I want to have you do before we say goodbye. First, share this with someone. If you know someone that's a coach, I don't care what level they're at, I believe that something that Jake Boss said is going to encourage anyone that listens to this, but especially if you're a coach or you know a coach, please share this podcast with them and let them know about Jake Boss and what he's doing at Michigan State. Another suggestion, hit that follow button or that subscribe button on whatever podcast app you're listening to so that you never miss an opportunity to hear Sports Spectrum's latest show. When you follow, when you subscribe, it comes right there up on your podcast scheduled of shows, if you will, and you'll never miss an episode of Sports Spectrum's podcast. Multiple podcasts coming every single week. Here we are 5 years now into this project with Sports Spectrum, and I'm so grateful at the place that God has planted us, especially with the intersection of sports and faith. That is my passion, and hopefully you enjoy us here at Sports Spectrum trying to bring Jesus into all of our sports conversations. So thank you again for tuning in. Join us next time, and we'll see you guys then. Have a great rest of your day. And this is the Sports Spectrum Podcast. See you soon.